Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, he shouted. Mercy, that strange transformative reach from a center of strength to a center of need that changes everything and makes all things new. Mercy, that strange transformative reach from the center of strength to a center of need that changes everything and makes all things new. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, this blind beggar sitting outside by the roadside, shouted as he heard Jesus was on his way. This Jesus of Nazareth was coming. This Jesus that Bartimaeus had heard could heal, not only body, yet spirit and soul. Invited people who had been on the margins into community that was life-giving and inclusive. So Bartimaeus begins to shout, Jesus, Son of David, and you notice the Christological language, yes, have mercy on me. Yet many sternly ordered, some biblical translations say rebuked him to be quiet. They attempted to silence him. They attempted to keep him away from his liberation. They attempted to keep him away from Jesus. How dare you, Bartimaeus, step outside the societally constructed box that we have put you in. Stay on the margins. Stay invisible. We don't want to see you. Stay in your own country. Stay in those carefully constructed binary boxes. We need you to stay silent, Bartimaeus. We have witnessed this past week many different forms of such silencing. That's what violence tries to do. Tries to make us afraid of one another. Tries to keep us silent. We as a nation, we as a people of faith need to be crying out, Son of David, Jesus, have mercy on us too. Yet Bartimaeus was persistent. Bartimaeus knew his worth. He knew he was worthy of an encounter with the divine. And so he would not be deterred. In the face of those attempting to silence him, to shut him up, he would not be silent. In fact, he cried out even louder. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Walter Brueggemann tells us that Jesus is God's mercy among us. Jesus is another wave of mercy, the kind of mercy that God's been doing all through history, all through that Old Testament, waves and waves of mercy, because God's mercy is given continually in this world to make all things new. Mercy, I hope you're trying on this definition, right? That transformative reach from a center of strength to a center of need. It's a reaching out from a place of strength to a place of need that makes all things new. Mercy, that strange transformative reach from a center of strength to a center of need that changes everything and makes all things new. Jesus, who's on the move with his caravan of folks, heading towards Jerusalem, leaving behind a life. And there's all these noises and chaos happening around him. I can hear some sheep baying, the clip-clop of some horses, people chatting with one another, possibly trying to get in the way of Jesus, trying to get in touch with Jesus, and yet Jesus, amongst the chaos and the loudness, stands still. And he listens. Amongst all the other voices, Jesus stands still and he listens. And he hears Bartimaeus' cry. Bartimaeus' cry that is speaking out against a system that is unjust, This system that refuses to see those in need, that has budgets that aren't helping folks who need some food and some shelter. Bartimaeus' cry, we may think, is just a healing story, but it's more than that. It's layered because it's speaking out against the evils and injustices of his day. That those folks who were in power refused to reach out from their center of strength to a center of need. They refused to offer basic hospitality and care. So Jesus stands still and he hears this cry that is multi-layered. And he says, "Come, call him here." And this is where we get to have a little fun with sociological crowd behavior, because this was the same crowd a few moments earlier that was trying to silence Bartimaeus. And yet here's this one voice of wisdom that says, we're not going to play that way. We're not going to treat one another that way. Jesus is one voice of strength, his voice of clarity, his voice of compassion about God's alignment, his voice of justice. And the crowd says, all right, let's call Bartimaeus over, rather than trying to keep him on the outside, to keep him away from his Jesus. Are y'all with me this morning? That one brave, courageous person who's willing to speak out and stand in solidarity with those in need. That one courageous person who's willing to give voice to a different narrative that enlivens and provides hope and peace, rather than a lack of inclusivity and a moving away. So he invites Bartimaeus amongst these voices attempting to silence. Jesus shifts the behavior and says, "Come, call him over." So this crowd says to Bartimaeus, this crowd who was attempting to silence now says, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." The writer of this Gospel of Mark is brilliant. I hope y'all are seeing this interplay between seeing and hearing. The gift of sight is for Bartimaeus, but the gift of healing is just as desperately needed by those who have been willfully deaf to his cries. Those, in spite of their proximity to Jesus and the time that they've spent journeying with him, are oblivious to his priorities and his compassion. Not only are we seeing Bartimaeus who's going to regain his sight, we're seeing a crowd of people learning new ways to hear those in need. Most people just simply ignored Bartimaeus, yet this crowd had rebuked him. They had chastised him for thinking that he was worthy of Christ's attention or their own attention. We don't have to look very far for that silencing that happened throughout this past week. Trying to silence our Jewish sisters and brothers, trying to silence our LGBTQ trans sisters and not the right language, folks, yes? Trying to use violence and access to guns to make us afraid of one another. And into that, Jesus breathes another narrative, another way. He reminds us that we're worthy of Christ's attention. He reminds us of his compassion and his priorities. So Bartimaeus does a bold move. Bartimaeus throws off his cloak, and we're going to spend just a tiny moment in literalism. Are you all right with that? I know we're progressive intellectual folks, but we're just going to be literal for a moment. So Bartimaeus takes off his cloak, and he throws it on the ground as he leaps up. His cloak, y'all, he needed that, right? It's a man who didn't have anything. He needs that cloak to stay warm. That's the cloak he would throw down on the ground when people would come by and throw their coins so that he could have some food. He needed that cloak, and yet he lets it go. Literally, symbolically. This is a transformational, bold, trusting act for him to leave that behind, literally and symbolically, because it represents leaving behind an old life, an encounter with Jesus that's going to change everything, because Bartimaeus is interacting with that mercy. Jesus being that center of strength, reaching into Bartimaeus' center of need. and it provides him with a new life. And then Jesus asks the most obvious question there is, what do you want me to do for you? And this is where we can talk to Jesus and say, really? Jesus, you're not on your A game? I mean, you are, right? But really, isn't it quite obvious what Bartimaeus needs? And yet Jesus' question is opening this invitation even deeper. Rather than Bartimaeus just being a pawn in this story, Jesus is opening this possibility that Bartimaeus gets to claim his own agency. Bartimaeus gets to participate in this relationship and be a co-creator in his healing. Can we name the ableism that's here? And I can't wrap that up nice and pretty, y'all. I've tried all week, and so it just needs to sit. The ableism that's inherent in this, yes, that sight is I don't want to use the word better. What's a better word? That sight is all of those things. And yet, we know as a society, postmodern thinking, scientific, that some folks will not have sight, physical sight. Some folks will not be able to hear. Some folks won't have will have not all the limbs. And yet we know that folks are still beloved children of God, yes? So the ableism is thinking that we have to have sight, or, y'all with me, hearing, to have that be better. That's not what's being said here. So Bartimaeus receives his sight after he is encouraged to participate in his own agency. He asks what Jesus asks him, what do you need? He said, teacher, let me see again. So for Bartimaeus, this is that act of naming what he needs. This is his act of accepting that center of strength, reaching into his need. So Jesus responds, go, your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well, not only physically, but Jesus knows now that Bartimaeus has entered into a deeper relationship with Jesus and this community. Bartimaeus leaves behind life as a beggar, and he becomes a follower of Jesus on the way. He co-creates his relationship with his Jesus. So as followers of Jesus on the way, where are you in need of God's mercy this morning? Where is your need that you need to encounter God's transformative reach of strength to come into your very need? Where is it that you need your sight restored? I am aware, especially after this last week, that we are barraged with images in the 24-hour news cycle. I can't even get into my email without seeing all the, maybe that means we don't need email anymore, but, right? I am aware, my tender-hearted people, of our need to take gentle care of ourselves. That we are those people who need to be intentional about our self-care. That's not a luxury, it's a necessity. If you need a break from not seeing, if you need to avert your eyes, if you need to not hear for a little bit, while you ground yourself more fully and allowing God's strength to fill you. And then when you're ready, whose cries do you hear? Whose cries do you hear? Individually, we need to continue listening as a community of faith so that we can be those people co-creating mercy. We can be that faith community that reaches out from our places of strength into those places of need so that we can continue raising our voices loudly And I know I'm hitting up against the nice Minnesota culture where we don't make ourselves too big and too bright, but this is the time where we need to continue shining that Christ light so that we can stand in solidarity with those voices being silenced. We can stand in solidarity with our sisters and brothers at the Tree of Life. We can stand in solidarity with our sisters and brothers here, our Jewish sisters and brothers, so that we can continue to remind ourselves about God's beloved children, holy and precious in God's sight. So we ask, oh God, that you would help us align ourselves with your compassion, align ourselves with the way that you see and the way that you listen, so that we can be reminded of your priorities and your compassion, so that we can be people of strength, reaching into those places of need and making all things new through you. Amen.